Okay, next we're going to make the corners, and we're going to use the geometry that already exists on the base plate in order to do that. We could create them as 4 individual separate components, but the way we're going to do this is going to take advantage of the fusion feature of bodies. That way I can pattern the bodies before I put the polygons on the corners. And then, after I've created all of them, I can create 4 different components for the 4 corners from the bodies. So that's the process we're going to use here. So first thing I want to do, I have my Trammel base plate still active. Let's click on the bullet next to Trammel Toy Project, which is the parent of this whole thing, the major assembly, so that that's active. So now I'm going to create a new component that I'm just going to call corners. And all 4 corners are going to be created in this other file. Okay, so, and I just say okay, and you see what happens. It makes corners active, and the base plate becomes translucent. So now we'll go ahead and put a sketch on the XY plane, and we're going to start building this. I'm just going to eyeball a rectangle that is going to be the corner offset distance, which should come out as 1.4 millimeters. I think that's the way we save that, corner offset. Okay, and then I want to be very careful when I do this because I want to make sure I get the outside edge, not the edge created by the fillet. So then I'm going to go collinear and make sure that that edge lines up with the outside edge, and make sure this edge lines up with the left outside edge. And then I can do finish sketch, and we see that's lining up nicely. I'll go ahead and extrude that. That's the corner offset height. Okay, next we'll put a sketch on that surface, that top surface. And I'll come down and make sure I get that corner. And now I want corner side, which should be 1.5 inches. Finish the sketch. When I extrude it, I have to extrude both the square from the original geometry and the L shape, and that'll be the corner height. So then I'll go ahead and extrude that. Okay, and on that corner, let's see, on that corner, we want a fillet that runs vertically on that inside edge of 0.2 inches. Okay, and then the other thing I'll do is I'll go ahead and again add some chamfers. I can chamfer outside edges. I want to chamfer that filleted edge, and then coming around to this side, again, we're just going to chamfer anything that might affect how it's going to function. I don't want to chamfer where the pieces are coming together. And one small little edge there. There we go. Okay, so now I can chamfer all of those edges. Oh, I missed one. There we go. Okay, so we have all those edges chamfered. We need to put a measurement there, which we defined as a variable for chamfer. Say okay. Now, one of the things with this, we need to make sure that we don't move this out of position, okay? Because we are going to want to have this constrained in a little bit. If you do, just undo it and make sure it stays even with your sides, okay? So now we have one corner built, and here's where we're going to use fusion to its greatest abilities here. We're going to expand the origin, and I'm going to create a mirror where I'm going to mirror a body. And in the corners, I do have one body here. I'm going to mirror that body, and I'm going to mirror it across the YZ mirror plane. So now there's a second mirror created, and then, or the second corner created with a mirror. And then I'm going to create another mirror where I'm going to mirror again the bodies. So let's pick both of those bodies, select my mirror plane, and let's mirror both of those across the XZ plane. So now I have all 4 corners created. So now what I need to do is create the polygons and drill the hole and add chamfers. And you see real quickly we're going to get to a finished all 4 corners. So in order to create a sketch on the back side, I'm going to turn the visibility off of my base So that way I can select the back face as a sketch. Okay, but then I want to turn the visibility of my base plate back on. And let's make the bodies invisible, because now I want to project the polygon shapes. So I've got the hexagon there, the rectangle, the square, the trapezoid. Okay. Next, I'll turn my visibility for my corners back on, turn those bodies back on, and I'll turn the base plate off. Okay, now for the rectangle, that's probably the trickiest one to do an offset. I can't just use the offset tool. When I go to draw my rectangle here, I'm going to want the outside edge to still be flush with the outside face. So this is the outside here. I can tell that this is the side I see the fillet. And then the offset I want to use is the allowance. So I'm going to click this one and this one, and then that's the allowance for the polygons, which should be 5/1000ths of an inch. So you see there is a tiny little gap there. So we want to bring that inside by 5/1000ths. So that's one of the reasons we define that. Makes it real easy to do. On the other ones, we should be able to just use the offset tool and make sure we come in by 5/1000ths. So I just clicked inside, and now I should have a line going inside. Okay, so my object line is black, and that's 5/1000ths inside. And we'll do that for all the other 3 polygons. If it happens to go outside, then you can always put a negative and make it a negative allowance. I think partly that has to do with Fusion is getting smarter. If you saw, I did a quick click and move in instead of moving out. So that 5/1000ths allowance ends up moving in, so I don't have to type the negative. Okay, so then at this point, now we will go ahead and extrude all of those. And you're going to also make sure you click the circles, because it also grabbed those other edges there. So we want to make sure we extrude the circle as well. That's centered on the polygon. And now we'll extrude that a distance that is the male depth. Again, that was the one measurement that was a little bit adjusted due to being 2 millimeters thinner, because that's one layer height on the printer, 0.2 millimeter smaller. So we'll go ahead and say OK, and that joins, and notice that joined all those, so we still just have all of those polygons there, and they are still all in one component, separate body. So now let's see. Now what we want to do, we could go ahead and put the chamfers on there for ease of assembly. I want to chamfer all the edges of my polygons in the face. So that's just a matter of manipulating so I can get all those edges. There we go. And again, we don't want to chamfer too much. Just enough to ease the assembly, especially if it comes out a little snug off the printer. And that chamfer distance we defined as a variable, so we don't have to type it, 0.4 millimeters. Kind of nice. Okay, so finally, last thing is we need to drill our tapped holes. So that will be all for the modeling then. So what I'm going to need to do is let's do a new sketch on the face there. And I'll go ahead and turn the visibility of my Trammel base back on. And once I do that, I can then go ahead and project the geometry. And I can just pick the circles from the back side of my base plate. And by doing that, go ahead and say OK to projecting my geometry. By doing that, that gives me my center points of where to drill my holes. So now I can finish my sketch, create a hole, and I can do a tapped hole, picking all 4 of those center points. Of course, this is a simple tapped hole. It does not need to be flat bottomed. And we need a size 832 So we find a size 8 screw, 832, and I think we want to go a depth of 0.4 inches, something like that. And if we click modeled, it will model the threads on the plastic part, which is what we want if we're going to 3D print this. So then we'll say OK, and you can see now we have all our parts that are still defined as bodies though. So there's one more step or a couple more steps we need to do. So let's go ahead and save this, and we can turn our base plate back on. And actually we can activate the whole thing. Okay, now I still have 4 separate bodies that need to be components. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on body 1 and let's create components from bodies. So then that keeps that in the corners file, and then all I got to do is click on that to rename it, and I'm going to rename that as upper left corner. So now that's a component instead of a body. So now I'll right click on the second one and select create components from bodies, and then you got to click to rename it. That's a left click, and that's upper right corner. Right click, create component from bodies. So then go ahead and click to rename it, lower left corner. And finally, lower right corner. I need to activate my corners in order to modify the material. So I can make those all PLA. We'll activate the base project. And now here, we're going to do as-built joints from the base plate to each corner. So this is the other benefit of building this in place. The assembly is really easy. So that's just a point and click for 4 as-built joints. And there's the base plate corners.